I put the notice up on a Tuesday, nailed it to the board outside Garvey's feed store in 2 sentences flat. Briggs Ranch, Sullen Creek. Widow man needs a capable woman to run a household and work alongside. Terms fair. No romance implied or expected. Inquire within by Friday. My foreman, Del Prout, watched me hammer the second nail and said nothing for a long moment. "You sure about the last part?" he said finally. "Which part?" "The part where you wrote it like a livestock auction." I pulled my hat down and walked back to my horse. I was sure. Margaret had been gone 3 years come October, and what was left of me that was useful was still useful. The cattle, the land, the ranch hands I paid honest wages, the fence lines I kept tight. What was left of me that wasn't useful, I had tucked somewhere behind my sternum and left it. The ranch needed a woman's hand on the house. I needed someone capable. That was the whole of it. 4 women inquired by Friday. 2 I turned down the moment I read their letters. 1 wanted a monthly allowance sent to her mother in St. Louis, and the other asked whether the ranch had a piano. A 3rd came in person, looked at the state of the kitchen, and left without speaking. The 4th arrived on the noon stage from Calver, crossing on the following Wednesday. Her name was Nora Gale, and she was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected, exactly, probably something more obviously in need, someone the world had backed into a corner enough that my practical offer looked like rescue. Nora Gale did not look like she had been backed into a corner. She was a woman of perhaps 30, narrow-shouldered but not slight, with dark eyes that took inventory of a room the way a surveyor takes inventory of land, without sentiment, without hurry. She had a single trunk and a leather satchel, and she moved them herself off the stage before I could offer to help. She looked at me the way those eyes looked at the room. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "Miss Gale, I read your notice carefully. I want to be clear that I read it the way it was written practically, and I'm answering it the same way. All right. I can cook, keep accounts, run a household, and I've worked cattle before some. I'm not afraid of hard work or hard weather. I don't expect sentiment, and I won't manufacture it. That suits me." We shook hands there on the street in front of Garvey's in the dust, with the stage pulling away. Del was watching from across the street, and I didn't look at him. We were married before Judge Harlan Voss 4 days later. Nora wore a plain gray dress that was her second best. She told me that plainly, that her best dress was for a different occasion and she didn't intend to use it on a practical matter. I wore my good coat, which Margaret had once told me made me look like a preacher at a funeral. The judge read the words. We said the words. Nora Gale became Nora Briggs in 11 minutes, and we rode back to the ranch in the wagon in reasonable silence. I had moved my things to the barn loft the night before. I did it without being asked and without saying anything about it. She had walked through the house once when she arrived, taken the inventory she took of every room, and I had watched her pause in the doorway of the bedroom Margaret and I had shared for 14 years. She didn't say anything about it either. She went to the small room at the back, the one I used for storing tack catalogs and winter receipts, and said she'd sleep there. I cleared it out for her that evening. The house had been rough and quiet for 3 years, kept barely by my own grudging effort, and a woman from town named Mrs. Pell who came twice a week to do laundry and left without lingering. Inside a week of Nora's arrival, the house was different without looking different. The kitchen smelled of something cooked through, not just heated. The back step that had been loose for 2 years was nailed down. The window that had stuck since last winter opened clean. I noticed these things and did not comment on them. She did not comment on the state they'd been in before. We moved around each other like 2 men sharing a camp who have an agreement to be useful and unbothered. She set breakfast before I came in from morning chores and had the coffee hot. I repaired the back fence where the cattle had pushed through and told her which pasture gate needed a new latch before she found it stuck. We passed information across the dinner table like dispatches, Tomorrow's weather, the state of the well, the delivery from the feed store expected Thursday. She had a small ledger she'd brought with her, and inside 2 weeks she was keeping the ranch accounts in it, cleaner than I'd kept them, flagging a payment I'd missed and a supplier I was overpaying. "Garvey's charges you 4 cents over market on the winter oats," she said one evening, not looking up from the ledger. "Garvey's extends credit without a word when the season goes bad." She considered that, then made a note. "Fair," she said, and moved on. I think about that exchange now, the economy of it, the fact that she weighed what I said and adjusted her ledger without the need to be right about it. I'd been married once before to a good woman, a warm woman, and I don't say anything against Margaret when I say that she and I had never talked about the ranch accounts with that kind of plain equity. There was a respect in it that I didn't know to name at the time. The first month passed. I was sleeping in the barn loft. Dell asked me one morning how that arrangement was working out, and I told him to mind the south herd. It was a jacket that started moving things, though I didn't know it at the time. I had a canvas work jacket I wore for fence repair and rough riding. Old thing, the left elbow worn through, the collar stitching gone on one side. I'd been wearing it torn for 2 seasons because the tearing didn't bother me, only the cold got through eventually, and even then not enough to do anything about it. One morning in late September I came in for the noon meal and the jacket was folded on the bench by the door. It had been mended, not patched crudely, the way a man patches a thing to stop the bleeding. Mended, the elbow refaced with a piece of canvas that matched close enough you had to look to see it, the collar stitching rerun even and tight. I stood there looking at it for a moment. Nora was at the stove. She didn't turn around. I put the jacket on and went back out and didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything, and that was the whole transaction. But I thought about it that afternoon while I was riding the fence line. Nobody had mended anything of mine in 3 years. Not because nobody was willing. Dell would have done it if I'd asked. Mrs. Pell might have. But I hadn't asked, and I hadn't noticed enough to think to ask, and Nora Gale had noticed without being asked and done it without making anything of it. It was a small thing. I know it's a small thing, but the small things accumulate in a life, and I have come to believe that it is the small things that actually show you what a person is made of more than the large ones. The large ones anyone can perform. The small ones, done without witness and without wanting thanks for them, those are the true texture of a person. October came cold and fast that year. The creek that ran along the east pasture flooded after 3 days of hard rain, the kind of flooding that starts slow and convinces you it has stopped, and then doesn't stop. I was out with Dell and 2 of the hands pulling a section of fence out of the water before it dragged into the lower pasture. Nora had ridden out that morning to check on a stray heifer we'd been watching, and I hadn't thought about the creek route she'd taken. Dell thought of it before I did. He said my name and I was already turning the horse. I found her at the crossing. Her horse had refused the water, good horse, right to refuse it. The creek was moving fast and carrying debris, and she was standing on the near bank in the rain, looking at the water with that surveyor's look, working out alternatives. She was soaked through to the skin, and her boots were already muddy to the knee from having tried the bank on foot and thought better of it. She looked at me when I rode up, and the look was not frightened. It was the look of a woman recalculating. "The low crossing," I said. "Half a mile back." I was weighing whether the time was worth it. Time isn't worth it if the water takes you. I put my hand down, up behind me. She took my hand and came up behind me without argument, which told me she'd already decided the same thing and just hadn't said so yet. We rode the half mile to the low crossing in the rain, her grip on my coat easy and sure, not clutching. I got her back to the house and told her to get changed before she went cold, and she went. I went back out because the fence wasn't done. When I came in that evening, there was hot food on the table and a dry pair of wool socks set on the hearth for me, though she said nothing about them and neither did I. That night I lay in the barn loft, and listened to the rain on the roof. I was not used to being looked after. Margaret had looked after me, of course she had, and I had looked after her, and that had been good and real. But after she'd gone, I'd sealed that door, sealed it, and told myself the seal was fine and the room behind it could stay closed. The socks on the hearth were a small thing. The jacket had been a small thing. But somewhere in the sealing off, in the 3 years of keeping everything tight and managed and useful, I had stopped noticing whether I was cold. Nora's quiet attention was making me notice again, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I lay there in the rain listening to it until I slept. In November, I started sleeping in the house again. I didn't make a declaration of it. I simply came in one night after a long day moving cattle ahead of a cold front, and the house was warm, and the barn was not warm, and I was tired in a way that got into the bones, and I brought my bedroll in and laid it on the floor of the front room in front of the dead fireplace and slept there until morning. Nora said nothing about it. The next night I did the same. The night after that, the fire was already going when I came in, and I slept in front of it on the floor, and in the morning she set coffee near my hand before I was fully awake, and that was that. A week after, I moved back to the bedroom. It was a thing that needed doing practically, and we both knew it. The floor was bad for my back and the front room was not made for sleeping. I moved back, and she stayed in the back room, and that arrangement continued and was what it was: a practical household, a working partnership, a marriage in legal terms between two people who had agreed at the outset not to make it anything more. I told myself it was working well. It was working well. I took to sitting on the porch after supper some evenings, the way I used to when Margaret was alive, just to watch the last of the light go off the hills. One night in late November, Nora came out and sat in the other chair without asking if I wanted company. We sat there in the cold for a while, not talking, watching the dark settle in over the valley. "You do this often," she said eventually. It wasn't quite a question. "Most evenings when the work allows." She nodded. We were quiet another while. "It's a good piece of country," she said. "It is." That was all. She went back inside after a time, and I stayed until the cold drove me in, and I thought, yes, it is a good piece of country, and I had not thought that plainly for 3 years, had not let myself simply sit with that and feel it. I had been moving through the land without really seeing it. She had looked at it and said it was good, and I had agreed, and it was the most uncomplicated thing I had felt in a long time. Dell asked me, about a month after she'd arrived, whether I thought it would work out. "She can run a ranch," I said. "That's not what I asked." "It's what I answered." He let it go because Dell was a wise enough man to know when to let a thing go. But he watched. I knew he was watching. I have never been a man who is easy to read, or so I thought, but Dell had ridden with me for 11 years and he had known Margaret, and he had watched me seal off after she'd gone. And now, he was watching me come unsealed in the small, unannounced ways, and he was wise enough not to say so. The visit to Margaret's grave happened in the second week of December, and I did not plan it. I went on a Sunday, the way I did most Sundays when the weather allowed, up the hillside above the east pasture, the small square of ground with the iron fence I'd put in myself. I took my hat off and stood there a while. I had been doing this for 3 years, standing there, not quite praying, not quite talking, just present, paying the debt of presence, I suppose. I heard her coming up the hill before I saw her, the sound of boots in the dry grass. I didn't turn, and she stopped a few feet behind me when she saw where I was. I could hear her decide not to retreat. She came and stood beside me a step back and didn't say anything. Didn't offer words of comfort, didn't ask about Margaret, didn't fill the silence with sounds about how she understood or was sorry. She just stood there, present with me in the cold. After a while, I put my hat back on. "She would have liked you," I said. I don't know why I said it, it was true. Nora didn't answer right away. Then, "I'll take that seriously." We walked back down the hill side by side, and didn't speak about it again. That night at supper, she asked me about the ranch in the early years, how I'd built it, not about Margaret, but about the land and the cattle and the hard early winters. And I told her. I told her about the first winter we'd lost a third of the herd, and about the year the creek had jumped its banks and taken out the lower pasture fence, and about Dell's first year when he was so green he tried to turn a longhorn with his hat. She listened the way she listened to everything, as though the information mattered, as though she was adding it to a ledger she intended to use. I stayed at the table longer than I had in years. The first real snow came on a Thursday in the third week of December. I had known it was coming. The sky had that particular pale gray weight to it for 2 days, and I had moved most of the cattle to the lower pastures where they'd have some shelter from the tree line. What I had not accounted for was the bull. He was a Hereford cross, big-shouldered and contrary, and he had pushed through a gate the night before the snow and gotten himself up into the high east pasture, which was the wrong place for an animal that size when a serious snow came in. I knew it in the morning when Dell came in and told me the gate was open and the bull was gone, and the snow was already starting. Dell and one of the hands went up the east pasture track. I took the north fence line to come around from the other side and cut off the high ground. Nora had saddled her horse before I got to the barn and was checking the cinch when I came through the door. "You're staying," I said. She looked at me with those level eyes. "You need someone on the high ground to the north. Dell can't split 3 directions." She was right. It was a practical assessment of the situation, and she was right. And I wanted to tell her to stay anyway and knew it would be wrong to say it. So I told her the North Trail landmarks she'd need, and which fence posts had the painted markers for the pasture corners, and she listened with the same attention she brought to the ledger, and then we rode out in opposite directions. The snow came in hard about an hour into it. Not a blizzard exactly, no killing wind, but heavy and fast, the kind that erases the ground markings you're relying on and makes every hillside look like every other hillside. I found the bull in the far corner of the high east pasture, standing with his back to the weather, looking disgusted with his own choices, which was fair enough. Getting him moving took time. Dell and the hand met me at the middle gate, and we pushed him down and through and into the lower pasture, where he stood in the shelter of the tree line looking disgusted further. Nora was not at the north fence line when I got there. I told myself the north route was longer, that she was fine, that she knew the painted markers, that she was a capable woman who had assessed worse situations than a December snow and made the right call. I told myself these things in sequence, and then I turned north and rode hard. I found her at the fence line itself, working a gate latch that had frozen. She had the cattle she'd found moving through it, pushing them with her horse's body and working the latch with bare hands because her gloves were too thick to find the catch. She had it almost free when I got to her. I got down and worked the latch with her, the iron cold through my own gloves, and the gate came open, and we pushed the cattle through. She had blood on her right hand from where the frozen latch had caught the skin. "Let me see," I said. "It's fine. Let me see." She held out the hand, and it was not bad, a small cut, already crusting in the cold, but my chest did something when I saw it that I didn't have a name for. I took her hand in both of mine and looked at it properly, and the wind was blowing and the snow was still coming down, and the cattle were complaining somewhere beyond the fence, and I held her hand in mine and did not let go of it immediately. I looked up at her. The snow was in her hair. She was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before, which was not the surveyor's inventory. It was something quieter, something she had perhaps been keeping in a room of her own behind a sealed door. "You came north," she said. "You were here. You didn't know I was in trouble. Didn't matter." We stood there in the snow a moment. Then I let go of her hand, and we gathered the horses, and we rode back to the ranch through the last of the snowfall. I have tried since then to put into words what happened that evening, and I have not managed it exactly. We came in from the cold. She went to change. I built up the fire and put the coffee on. She came back and sat by the hearth with her right hand wrapped in a strip of clean cloth, and I sat across from her, and the fire was going, and outside the snow was settling quiet over the valley. We didn't talk for a while. The fire crackled. One of the horses shifted in the barn. Then I said, I would have kept riding. She looked at me. If you hadn't been here, I said, today, this whole autumn, I would have kept riding through it the way I've been riding through things for 3 years, not caring much whether I came in or not. She was quiet. The fire moved. I noticed, she said, in the early weeks, there's a way a man carries himself when he's decided the living part is just something he's doing until it's done. It wasn't like that. I know it wasn't a decision, just a way of being. She looked at the fire. I recognized it. I thought about that. You've been there yourself. After my father died, took me the better part of a year to be somewhere instead of just moving through it. We were quiet again. Outside, nothing but the snow and the dark. You've been here, I said. The jacket. The creek, the grave. You've just been here without making anything of it. It wasn't strategy, she said. I'm not built for strategy in personal things. I just did what seemed useful. It was more than useful. She looked at me then, and I looked at her, and the thing that passed between us had no need for more words than that. I said, I don't know what we are. We're married, she said. You know what I mean. She was quiet a moment. I know what you mean. She looked at the fire again. I stopped counting days somewhere around the middle of October, the kind of counting you do when you're seeing how long you have to stay before you can leave with your word intact. You stopped. I stopped. I wasn't counting days anymore. I was just here. She glanced at me. That was before the jacket. I sat with that. I'm a difficult man, I said. I know that. I don't warm easy, and when I do, I don't show it with any grace. I didn't come here looking for grace, she said. I came here looking for a life that had some substance to it, work that meant something, ground under my feet. A pause. You're all of those things, Colt. The rest of it, I didn't expect it, and I'm not performing it. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and looked at the fire for a while. When spring comes, I said, the notice I put up, I want to put a different one. What kind of notice? The kind that says the position's been filled, permanent. It was quiet for a moment. Then I heard something in her breath that might have been a sound almost like a laugh, quiet and warm, which I had not heard from her before, and it was the best sound in that room. I believe that's already the case, she said. I looked over at her. She was looking at the fire, and the corner of her mouth had something in it that wasn't quite a smile but was the direction of one. I looked at that for a moment, and then I looked at the fire too, and we sat there by the hearth while the snow finished settling over Sullen Creek Valley, and the house was warm, and outside the land was good and quiet, and there was nothing more that needed saying. That was 6 winters ago now. Nora runs the ranch accounts still, and she is better at them than I ever was, and she has never once let me overpay for oats. The back room where she first slept is a storeroom again, proper. The chair on the porch that was hers is still hers, and on the evenings when the work allows we sit in them together and watch the light go off the hills, and she still says it's a good piece of country. Del retired 2 years back, and at his going-away supper he told Nora she had done the impossible, and when she asked what that was, he said she'd put some color back into the hardest-headed man in the valley. She told him that the color had already been there. He just needed someone to stay still long enough to notice it. I didn't argue with her. I've stopped arguing with her on the things she's right about, which is most things, and the ranch runs cleaner and the accounts balance, and the coffee is always hot when I come in from the cold, and on the mornings after a heavy snow, when the valley is white and new and still, I stand on the porch and look at it and think about a Tuesday in September when I put a notice on a board and wrote it like a livestock auction. And a woman stepped off a stage with a trunk. She moved herself and eyes that took inventory without hurry. I think about a frozen latch and a cut hand, and the snow coming down. I think about what it means to stop counting days. And then I go inside, where it's warm, and she looks up from the ledger when I come in the door. And that is the whole of it, that small, plain, sufficient thing. And it is more than I had any right to expect from a practical matter. And I am grateful for it every morning that I wake up on this piece of good country and find her here.